It's Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, does Elon Musk want a shutdown? As the doomsday clock over government funding ticks down towards what would be a catastrophic shutdown right now, it seems like Congress might be unable to get its act together to pass a budget that might be exactly what the Trump administration, or at least some inside it, are hoping for. But before we get to that, we need to talk about the devastating cuts to the Department of Education on Tuesday. So this week, an email went out to all Department of Education employees in Washington, D.C., about 3,100 of them who work at the Department of Ed building, that it would be closed today on Wednesday for unspecified security reasons. Well, it turns out those security reasons were mass firings. The department slashed about half of the employees in that building. Around 1,300 people or so are expected to receive pink slips. The Department of Ed also ended leases on buildings in some of the biggest school districts in the country, including in New York, Boston, and Cleveland, with more expected on the way in the next few weeks. The plan is exactly what Trump promised to do on the campaign trail and what conservatives for a long time have been advocating for. They want to shut down the Department of Ed and have wanted to shut it down since like 1980, 2 months after it was created, mostly because it's a civil rights-oriented department. So the Department of Ed doesn't really set curriculum or much of what's taught in schools. That is done at a state and local level by your state school board or your state education department, or really your local school boards. Yes, in the past 30 years, there have been things like the Bush-era's No Child Left Behind programs or Common Core under Obama that were meant to bring state schools into line with each other, some sort of consistency across the country. But really, that's not what the Department of Ed does. By and large, they make sure that students' civil rights are being violated, that things like racial discrimination or Title IX gender discrimination doesn't happen in our schools. They make sure that federal assistance gets to states and schools that need it so poor children can go to school or get lunches so they don't go hungry. It makes sure that schools have funding for nurses, because in some places, a school nurse might be the only health care a kid gets. The Department of Ed also makes sure that education grants and financial aid can get to students who want to go to college but can't afford it. It also keeps track of student data, or at least it did until every single one of the employees at the National Center for Education Statistics was fired. Now, the NCES, which would not make as exciting of a CBS show as NCIS, makes sure that certain kinds of students aren't falling through the cracks by keeping track of that data. And we are talking about students from all walks of life, but, some of the big ones, like students with disabilities, something the Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, couldn't name in her interview with Fox News last night.
Expenditures and key programs?
Correct. Congress appropriates the money that is going through Title I, through IDEA programs.
What's that stand for?
You know what? I'm not sure I can tell you exactly what it stands for, except that it's the Programs for Disabled and Needs.
Individuals with Disabilities Act, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm guessing. I don't know. I don't know all my acronyms. I've been here for 30 years.
This is my fifth day on the job, and I'm really trying to learn them very quickly.
Right. It's a lot.
So not great there for the future of educating disabled kids if the head of the department in charge of making sure that they get an education aren't abused at school or aren't forced to be homeschooled like they were prior to 1980, doesn't know the name of the program. And also, for what it's worth, when McMahon gave that interview, it was her 9th day on the job, not her 5th day on the job, so maybe the Secretary of Education could use a math refresher. Insert your Department of Ed joke here. Now, I'll have more on these cuts to the Department of Ed, likely in Friday's episode, as we learn a little bit more about the fallout from this, because it is just happening, and it is still happening as I'm recording. But cutting staff and funds from the department actually gets us to the real topic of this episode, which is congressional Republicans pass a new budget plan in what's known as a continuing resolution, or a CR, to fund the government for the next 6 months until September 30th, because passing a real budget at this point is practically impossible. The government shuts down at midnight on Friday, and last night, House Republicans rammed through their plan to keep the government open. It wasn't exactly the same budget outline I talked about last week, though. While the mandatory cuts to Medicaid and Medicare are still on the table, they aren't a part of this resolution, but neither are any promises to protect those entitlement programs, which include, yes, Medicaid and Medicare, but also include things like SNAP benefits and Social Security. The resolution also stripped out money for individual districts that were put in there originally by members of Congress. Often those things are called earmarks, which get a bad rap, but they are a necessary part of how Congress works and kind of the reason we elect people to go there in the first place. They're often talked about as adding bloat or waste to the federal government, but it's things like you want a bridge or a road fixed in your city or town, you got to get your representative to put in an earmark for the Department of Transportation. There's a toxic waste site in your county that needs to be cleaned up. You need an earmark for the budget in the EPA. You want something to stay open like a shelter for women and children who have been abused or a food bank in your area. You need an earmark to help keep those things funded from the Department of Justice or the Department of Agriculture. And only your member of Congress can ask for those things. Anyway, not really the point here. The funding that Congress did put in this thing is more funding for the Department of Defense, which is actually something that's at odds with what the White House and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth want to do, which is cut 8% of the Defense Department budget. It also outlines a $6 billion plan to increase spending for veteran care, despite last week the VA announcing it would be firing 80,000 employees, many of them veterans. Now, Congress cut down on non-defense domestic spending, so funding for the vast majority of the government programs here in the U.S., including $20 billion in cuts to IRS tax enforcement just before tax season, while increasing funding for Border Patrol and also for women, infants, and children food funding. So not SNAP, not food stamps, but another version of that. You'll likely see WIC, W-I-C, on different foods in grocery stores. They did put a little bit more money into that program. So as this thing was being Frankensteined together, Trump practically begged House Republicans to get on board with this funding bill to avoid a government shutdown, saying on his social media platform, Truth Social, all Republicans should vote, please, with an exclamation point in parentheses, yes, next week, adding no dissent. We'll come back to why Trump wants this thing to pass in just a little bit here, but there was dissent. So the CR passed Tuesday night by just 3 votes, again showing just how slim the Republican majority in Congress is right now. One Democrat, Jared Golden from Maine, crossed the aisle to vote with Republicans, and one Republican, Thomas Massie from Kentucky, who was a guy who was bucked Trump before and voted against budgets in the past, just like this one, because he's so concerned about the national debt, crossed the aisle to vote with Democrats. Well, that didn't make Trump very happy, because as it came out that Massie was going to be a definite no vote on this, Trump threatened to get him unelected in 2 years, posting online several times about Massie, saying at one point he should be primaried and I will lead the charge against him. And that came just a few days before Elon Musk said he was putting $100 million more into the Trump super PAC that will likely flow downstream to all of these other Republicans. Not great for Thomas Massie. So after the vote, Johnson pulled a little bit of a political trick. He adjourned the House of Representatives, meaning members didn't have to work anymore. They could go home until next week. And that jams up the Senate, which has to vote on the resolution because it means that without the House there, they won't be able to make any changes to this bill that's now in front of them because the House would have to agree to any changes. And if they do make changes, it would mean getting Mike Johnson to call the House back into session and then getting all of these members back to D.C., where Republicans would likely be told to drag their feet in order to make a painful shutdown a little bit longer. And neither chamber of Congress really wants this to be a long back-and-forth fight when they're really just kicking the can down the road for another 6 months. But it might be a big fight. House Democrats are urging their Senate counterparts right now not to vote for the bill saying that Republicans knew this was going to be poisonous for them and Democrats. Here's what Representatives Pramila Jayapal and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told reporters earlier this week.
They should refuse to allow this bill to pass in the Senate.
If they don't?
I think there's going to be huge backlash from across the country, and I think all of them will have to deal with the consequences of that.
The Republicans have the White House, the Senate, and the House. If they want to do this, and if they want to screw over the American people, they can do this with their votes and their party. I do not believe that Democrats should participate.
Now, both of those women are among the most progressive members of the House, so whether they actually say anything that will land with Senate Democrats, we're not really sure. But right now, Senate Democrats don't appear to be on board with voting for this continuing resolution, and Republicans in the Senate need 8 of them to vote for it. Now, there is one yes vote from a Democrat. It is Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, who, as time has gone on here, is quickly becoming a much more conservative Democrat than when he was elected. He said he'd vote for this thing to avoid the shutdown, but as I'm recording this, like I said, he's the only Democrat to say that so far. A government shutdown right now would not be a good thing. It would do some serious damage to the federal government, which has already been bloodied by Elon Musk and Doge over the last 2 months, and the Democrats know that. But they're a little more worried about what it would mean to not have protections for those social safety net programs I talked about before, and they want, as a part of this bill, a promise for Congress to rein in the president, and have called what this CR is right now essentially a blank check permission for Elon Musk and Donald Trump to keep doing what they're doing. But allowing the government to shut down is likely playing right into Elon Musk's plan. And we know that because Wired magazine had some incredible new reporting just last night saying exactly that. And if you haven't been following what Wired is doing in the last 2 months, you should be. It is some of the, if not the best, journalism out there right now about the work that Musk and Doge have been doing inside the federal government. Do yourself a favor, check out their stuff. Anyway, this new report from Wired said that Musk actually wants the shutdown, with sources telling them a shutdown has been his preference, with another really going mask off, saying, none of this, meaning Doge or the shutdown fight, is about saving money, right? It's all about destroying a liberal power base. Now, I don't know what they think a liberal power base is in the government. Well, yes, more federal employees, at least in 2022, said they were planning to vote for Democrats. It wasn't a majority of them, and Republicans right now control every branch of the government, so if anybody has a power base, it's them. Regardless, Musk wants this shutdown because it would make his work to cut the federal government workforce drastically easier, because when the government shuts down, agencies have to put lists together of essential and non-essential employees. But mainly, essential employees are just the people who will keep a department's lights on, not keep it running at maximum efficiency. And yeah, I can already hear the jokes about government efficiency coming my way here, but I can promise you that a skeleton crew operating any department isn't going to help with that. They're not designed to be how things actually function. I mean, we are talking about, at least according to a count, of about 860,000 people who would be furloughed or deemed non-essential during a shutdown, most of them coming from the Department of Defense. But having a list of essential and non-essential employees makes Musk's job a whole hell of a lot easier, because then he can order Trump to order agencies to cut all the non-essential staff and then use the lists that the agencies themselves put together to fire those people while giving himself cover by pointing to those lists. It's something that Musk has been trying to do since day one by offering quote-unquote buyouts to employees to self-describe themselves as non-essential, or getting them to answer an email about what they did last week, or getting his band of tech bro mercenaries to dig through sensitive employee data to find reasons to fire people. It would also mean that in the wake of a mass cutback in government workers, federal contractors and private companies would step in to fill the gaps, because government services and government work would still have to get done. And we are talking about contractors exactly like Elon Musk, whose companies are propped up by $38 billion worth of government money. And with a lack of government employees would come a lack of government oversight for these private contractors, which is what they want, but also breeds actual corruption, waste, and fraud. And if you don't believe me, look at the Paycheck Protection Program that was money given to businesses during COVID for some COVID relief. It was considered and is considered to be the greatest fraud in a generation, with billions of dollars going to private businesses that didn't need that money, but without real oversight because everything was in free fall because of the pandemic. Businesses and business owners didn't do the right thing. They took the money and ran. And that wouldn't get any better when the money is coming from a government not in the middle of a pandemic, but still desperate to make sure that people get services the government is supposed to provide. The thing is that the White House and Donald Trump don't want to shut down right now. Remember what he said earlier? He practically begged Republicans to pass this thing. Well, it's because the stock market is tanking right now. It's lost $4 trillion since Trump was elected. Prices on all sorts of goods right now are rising. Europe just promised tariffs on American imports. Canada is promising new tariffs as well, although some of those are paused on major things like electricity and steel. But given the way things have been going, who knows if those will go back in place. Job growth has slowed, and the Federal Reserve is now saying there's a 40% chance that we'll hit a recession. It's not above, 50%, but a 4 in 10 chance is only slightly better than playing Russian roulette with 2 bullets. Not my favorite kind of odds. But then you add a government shutdown into all this, and that is a recipe for some real disaster, both real world disaster and political disaster for Donald Trump. The last major shutdown, which was under Trump in 2019 and 2018, it was a Christmas over New Year's end of the year shutdown. It was also our longest. It was more than 30 days. The U.S. economy lost about $11 billion in a month. $3 billion of that we never got back, and the economy contracted about 0.2%, which I know doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when we're talking about the size of the U.S. economy, that's like $58 billion. And like I said, it's not just the real-world impacts, but the political ones too. Sure, Democrats will be blamed for a shutdown at first, but after a few days or a week, with the speed that the news cycle is or that this White House moves at, it won't take long for Democrats to flip that back on Republicans, who would be blamed for pushing through a bill they knew was poisonous just to score some political points and prove to Donald Trump that he's in charge. But what this does do is put Trump and Musk on yet another collision course. Musk wanting to shut down the government to keep lining his pockets, Trump not wanting the shutdown to be able to right the economy and show that he has power over Congress. All the while, millions of people across the country are likely to be in harm's way come midnight on Friday. But a lot of that could change before then, and I will definitely have more about all of this on Friday, which means that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to this on, like and subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new videos. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got brand new content going up there all the time. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod. All one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on X and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you on Friday.